woman sits in an expensive restaurant, candlelight flickering across the table. Her date has just said those 3 words, "I love you." Her heart should be racing. Her eyes should be filled with tears of joy. This should be the moment she's been waiting for her entire life. But instead, something cold and calculating moves through her mind. A question she's terrified to voice out loud. What does he want from me? Niccolò Machiavelli, the Renaissance philosopher who understood power better than anyone in history, would smile at this woman's instinct, because she just glimpsed a truth that most people spend their entire lives refusing to see. Love, as it exists in human society, is not a pure emotion, an authentic connection, or a selfless bond between 2 souls. Love is a strategy, a manipulation, a beautifully constructed lie that serves specific purposes for specific people at specific times. And the moment you understand this, the moment you see through the performance, everything about human relationships becomes terrifyingly clear. Machiavelli spent his life studying how people acquire and maintain power, and what he discovered is that the most effective form of control isn't through force or fear. It's through making people believe that serving your interests is actually their choice, their desire, their deepest fulfillment. And romantic love is the most sophisticated version of this control ever invented. It makes you surrender your freedom while believing you're experiencing liberation. It makes you sacrifice your interests while believing you're being noble. It makes you serve someone else's agenda while believing you're following your heart. The question is, are you ready to see how the mechanism works? Are you prepared to understand why society invested centuries into making you believe in something that primarily benefits everyone except you? Can you handle knowing that every love song, every romantic movie, every cultural message about soulmates and eternal devotion is actually a form of psychological warfare designed to make you controllable? Because once you see what Machiavelli saw about love, you can never unsee it. Open any history book, and you'll find the same pattern repeated across every culture and every era. Powerful families arranging marriages to consolidate wealth and political influence. Kings taking wives to secure alliances and produce heirs. Common people pairing off because economic survival required partnership. For most of human history, nobody pretended these arrangements were about love. They were transparently transactional. Marriage was a political tool, an economic strategy, a social contract. Love, if it happened at all, was considered a pleasant bonus but never the foundation. Then something shifted. The concept of romantic love as we know it today was systematically constructed and promoted, not because humanity suddenly evolved more tender emotions, but because romantic love serves power structures more effectively than arranged marriages ever could. When people believe they're choosing their partners based on authentic emotion, rather than strategic calculation, they don't resist the system. They embrace it, they defend it. They voluntarily enter arrangements that benefit the state, the economy, the established order, all while believing they're following their hearts. Machiavelli understood this principle perfectly. The best way to control people is to make them believe they're free, and romantic love is the ultimate expression of this control. You're not being forced into relationships, you're falling into them. You're not being manipulated into serving someone else's interests. You're choosing to because love. You're not sacrificing your autonomy. You're sharing your life. The language itself is designed to obscure the transaction underneath. Watch how love actually functions in the modern world, and you'll see Machiavelli's principles everywhere. A man pursues a woman not because of some mystical soul connection, but because she represents something he wants: status, beauty, validation, sexual access, companionship, the cure for loneliness. He doesn't admit these motivations even to himself. Instead, he tells himself and her a story about feelings, about chemistry, about fate bringing them together. Meanwhile, she's running her own calculations, his resources, his potential, his willingness to commit, his genetic fitness, his ability to provide security. She doesn't frame it this way consciously. She talks about connection, about feeling safe with him, about how he makes her laugh. But underneath the romantic language, both parties are engaged in what Machiavelli would recognize immediately as a negotiation of interests. Everyone who says they are in love is actually saying they've found someone whose interests align with theirs well enough to justify the compromises required. Men imagine they are always better than they are, Machiavelli observed. And this is nowhere more true than in romantic love. We imagine our love is pure when it's strategic. We imagine we're being authentic when we're performing. We imagine we're giving freely when we're engaged in elaborate exchanges. The man who claims he loves his wife unconditionally is actually saying his wife continues to provide enough of what he needs, that maintaining the relationship serves his interests better than leaving would. The woman who says she's in love is actually saying this particular man meets enough of her criteria that she's willing to invest in keeping him. Neither wants to admit this because the moment you make the transaction explicit, the whole beautiful lie collapses. So we maintain the fiction, we perform the emotion. We tell ourselves and each other stories about love that obscure the calculations underneath. Here's where Machiavelli's analysis becomes truly brutal. The people who benefit most from your belief in romantic love are never the ones encouraging your skepticism. Your parents want you to believe in love because if you don't, you might not give them grandchildren or maintain the family's social standing. The state wants you to believe in love because married people are more stable, more productive, more compliant citizens who are easier to tax and control. The economy wants you to believe in love because romance is a massive industry built on your willingness to spend money, proving your feelings are real. Your partner wants you to believe in love because if you saw the relationship as a transaction, you might negotiate better terms or walk away entirely. Religious institutions want you to believe in love because it sanctifies the arrangements they've always promoted for their own benefit. And even your friends want you to believe in love because your skepticism threatens the stories they've told themselves about their own relationships. Every force in your life has an incentive to keep you believing in the lie, which means questioning that lie requires standing completely alone against everything and everyone you know. Most people don't have that kind of courage. They'd rather believe a beautiful lie than face an ugly truth. They'd rather maintain the performance than admit they've been performing. They'd rather keep investing in relationships that don't serve them than confront the fact that love, as they've been taught to understand it, is a strategy for controlling them. It is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both, Machiavelli famously wrote. But he understood something even more fundamental. It's better to make people believe they love you than to force them to serve you. Because people who believe they're acting from love will sacrifice far more than people acting from fear. Fear has limits. Love has none. Fear makes people resentful. Love makes them grateful for the opportunity to surrender. This is the first devastating truth about romantic love that Machiavelli would want you to understand. Love is not an emotion that happens to you. It's a story you tell yourself to justify the strategic choices you're making for reasons you do not want to examine too closely. That woman in the restaurant didn't fall in love. She decided that this man's combination of attributes, resources, and potential met enough of her criteria that investing in a relationship served her interests. That man didn't fall in love. He decided that this woman provided enough validation, attraction, and partnership value that committing to her served his interests better than continuing to search. Neither wants to frame it this way, so they use the language of love. They talk about feelings and connection and destiny. They perform emotions they've been taught to perform. And they genuinely believe their own performance because the alternative is too threatening. The alternative is admitting that every relationship is fundamentally transactional, that every expression of love serves someone's agenda, that nothing about human connection is as pure or selfless as we pretend. Machiavelli observed that people are so simple and so ready to obey present necessities that the one who deceives will always find those who allow themselves to be deceived. And nowhere is this more true than in romantic love. We want to be deceived. We're desperate to believe someone loves us for who we truly are, rather than for what we provide. We're eager to believe our feelings are authentic, rather than conditioned responses to evolutionary pressures and social programming. We are ready to believe love is real rather than strategic, because believing in the strategy means accepting that we're all engaged in elaborate manipulations of each other, that authenticity in relationships might not exist, that the deepest human connections are still fundamentally about power resources and survival dressed up in prettier language. The construction of romantic love as society's central narrative serves multiple strategic purposes. It channels sexual energy into socially productive arrangements rather than destructive chaos. It creates stable family units that produce and socialize the next generation of workers and consumers. It ties individuals to the economic system through the need to provide for partners and children. It occupies people's time and attention with relationship maintenance, rather than questioning the systems exploiting them. It creates emotional dependencies that make people easier to control through appeals to protecting loved ones. It establishes conformity as romantic partners regulate each other's behavior far more effectively than external authorities could. And perhaps most importantly, it prevents people from ever developing true independence, because from the moment they reach adulthood, they're taught that being alone is failure, that their worth depends on being chosen by someone else, that the goal of life is finding love rather than developing power. Machiavelli understood that the most effective forms of control are the ones people don't recognize as control. When you force people to do something, they resist. When you manipulate them into wanting what you wanted them to do anyway, they comply enthusiastically. Romantic love is manipulation disguised as liberation. It makes people want exactly what serves the established order. It makes them believe that surrendering independence is actually achieving fulfillment. It transforms compliance into virtue and calls it commitment. It reframes sacrifice as love and celebrates it. Every romantic gesture is a small surrender of power. Every expression of love is a negotiation of terms. Every relationship milestone is a tightening of obligations. And all of it is wrapped in language so beautiful, so emotionally compelling, so deeply embedded in every story you've ever been told, that questioning it feels like attacking something sacred rather than examining something strategic. Walk into any bookstore and count the romance novels. Turn on any radio and hear the love songs. Watch any movie and witness the romantic subplot. This isn't accidental. This is systematic conditioning. You're being trained from childhood to believe that finding romantic love is the ultimate goal, the deepest meaning, the highest achievement of human existence. Why? Because people pursuing romantic love are people who aren't pursuing power. They're not building independent wealth. They're not developing dangerous ideas. They're not challenging systems. They're not forming alliances that threaten established hierarchies. They're pairing off, becoming predictable, taking on obligations that make them compliant. Machiavelli would recognize this immediately as a brilliant strategy of control. Distract people with the pursuit of something they think they want, something that feels meaningful and important, something that occupies all their energy and attention. Meanwhile, the actual power structures that govern their lives operate unopposed because everyone is too busy chasing love to notice they're being systematically exploited. The nature of people is to be bound more by the benefits they confer than by those they receive. This is the core psychological insight that makes romantic love such an effective control mechanism. When you believe you're in love, when you believe you're building a relationship, when you believe you're creating a family, you feel like you're conferring benefits. You feel generous, noble, selfless. You're giving your time, your resources, your energy, your freedom. And this feeling of giving makes you more attached to the relationship than receiving ever could, because we value most what we invest most in. The more you sacrifice for love, the more committed you become to believing that sacrifice was worth it. The more you give up for a relationship, the more you need to believe that relationship is meaningful. This is the trap. Society doesn't force you to surrender your power. It makes you want to. It makes surrendering feel like winning. It makes sacrifice feel like love. It makes serving someone else's interests feel like following your heart. Where are you watching this from? Drop your city in the comments, because what I'm about to reveal next applies regardless of your current relationship status. Here's the second devastating truth that Machiavelli would want you to understand about romantic love. The people who are most successful in love are not the most authentic or the most genuine. They're the most strategic. They're the ones who understand that love is a performance and perform it most effectively. They know what to say to trigger the emotional responses they want. They know how to create the feeling of connection while maintaining their actual independence. They know how to make their partners feel loved while ensuring their own interests are always protected. They understand that relationships are fundamentally about power, and they position themselves to have more of it. The most romantic gesture, the most passionate declaration, the most touching moment, all of it is strategy. Not necessarily conscious strategy. Most people have internalized the performance so completely they don't even realize they're performing. But Machiavelli would see through it instantly. He'd recognize the man who pursues a woman as someone deploying tactics to acquire an asset. He'd see the woman who plays hard to get as someone managing her perceived value in a sexual marketplace. He'd identify the couple posting their happiness on social media as people performing relationship success for social capital. None of this makes them bad people. It makes them human people. People engaged in the same strategic behaviors that all humans engage in, while telling themselves stories that make those behaviors feel more noble than they are. The real question isn't whether love is strategic. The question is whether you're conscious of the strategy, or whether you're being played by people who understand the game better than you do. Machiavelli's entire philosophy was built on the idea that it's better to understand how power actually works than to pretend power doesn't exist. And the same is true for love. You can keep pretending love is this pure mystical emotion that just happens to you. Or you can start seeing it for what it actually is. A complex negotiation of interests where both parties are trying to get their needs met while concealing the transaction under romantic language. The person who sees this clearly has a massive advantage over the person still believing in the fairy tale. They're not more cynical, they're more realistic. They're not less capable of connection. They're more capable of honest connection because they are not hiding from themselves or their partners what's actually happening. They can negotiate better terms because they acknowledge there are terms being negotiated. They can make conscious choices about what they're willing to sacrifice because they recognize they're sacrificing rather than just giving freely. They can protect themselves from being exploited because they see exploitation as possible rather than unthinkable in the context of love. Everyone sees what you seem to be. Few experience what you really are, Machiavelli wrote. And this is the essence of romantic relationships. Everyone sees the performance, the dates, the gestures, the declarations, the social media posts, the wedding, the anniversary celebrations. Very few people experience what's actually happening underneath. The negotiations, the resentments, the compromises, the calculations, the moments of doubt, the strategic decisions about when to fight and when to submit. The reality that both people are constantly assessing whether this relationship still serves their interests well enough to continue. Here's where the analysis becomes even more uncomfortable. The cultural narrative around love serves different strategic purposes for men and women. For women, the promise of romantic love obscures the reality that they're trading their youth, beauty, and reproductive capacity for resources, commitment, and security. If this transaction were made explicit, women might demand better terms. They might recognize their actual bargaining power and use it more effectively. They might see that the window during which they have maximum leverage is limited and plan accordingly. But instead, they're taught to believe in love, in soulmates, in waiting for the right person, in not being calculating or strategic because that's unromantic. This conditioning serves men who benefit from women making poor strategic choices. It serves the economy that benefits from women entering the workforce instead of leveraging their sexual market value for better personal outcomes. It serves the system that needs women to be workers and consumers, not shrewd negotiators of their own interests. For men, the promise of romantic love obscures the reality that they're trading their resources, commitment, and freedom for sexual access, companionship, and social validation. If this transaction were explicit, Men might question whether the exchange rate is fair. They might recognize that what they're giving up often exceeds what they're receiving. They might see that the social pressure to prove themselves through relationships is actually a mechanism for making them more productive and compliant. But instead, they're taught to believe that pursuing women is a natural masculine drive, that commitment is maturity, that providing is noble, that marriage is success. This conditioning serves women who benefit from men competing to offer them better terms. It serves the economy that benefits from men working harder to afford relationships and families. It serves the system that needs men to be providers and workers, not independent actors pursuing their own interests. Machiavelli would look at modern relationships and see a battlefield where both sides have been convinced they're in a partnership. He'd see men giving up their freedom, their resources, their time, their autonomy, all while believing they're lucky to have found love. He'd see women giving up their youth, their fertility, their options, their leverage, all while believing they're following their hearts. And he'd see that the only consistent winners in this arrangement are the systems that benefit from people pairing off, reproducing, consuming, and remaining too occupied with relationship maintenance to challenge anything. The great masses of people will more easily fall victim to a big lie than to a small one, Machiavelli might have said if he lived in the modern era. And romantic love is the biggest lie ever sold. Not because connection between humans isn't real, not because partnership can't be valuable, but because the way love is packaged, sold, and culturally enforced has almost nothing to do with genuine human connection and everything to do with social control. You're taught that being alone is sad. Why? Because independent people are harder to control. You're taught that commitment is maturity. Why? Because committed people are more predictable and exploitable. You're taught that sacrifice for love is noble. Why? Because people who sacrifice their interests are people who won't fight for them. You're taught that your worth depends on being chosen. Why? Because people seeking validation are people who'll conform to get it. Every romantic ideal you've internalized serves someone's agenda. The question is whether it serves yours. This brings us to the third brutal truth that Machiavelli would want you to understand. The language of love exists specifically to prevent you from seeing the transaction clearly. When someone says, "I love you," what they actually mean is you currently meet enough of my needs that I'm willing to continue investing in this relationship. When someone says, "I can't live without you," what they actually mean is, I've become dependent on what you provide, and the thought of losing access to it terrifies me. When someone says, "You complete me," what they actually mean is, I'm using you to fill voids in my own psychology, rather than doing the work to complete myself. When someone says we're soulmates, what they actually mean is our mutual needs and neuroses align well enough to create sustainable dysfunction. But we can't say any of that. We can't acknowledge the reality, because the moment we do, the entire romantic framework collapses. So we use coded language, we perform emotions. We tell stories that obscure the mechanics. Machiavelli understood that in order to maintain power, you must maintain the narratives that justify that power. In relationships, maintaining the narrative of romantic love is essential for maintaining the relationship itself. The moment both parties start speaking plainly about what they actually want and what they're actually trading, the romance dies. What's left is negotiation. What's exposed is transaction. What becomes clear is that love, as we've been taught to understand it, was always just a prettier word for mutual exploitation, with enough benefit to both parties to keep them compliant. The person who speaks this truth in a relationship is immediately labeled cynical, damaged, incapable of real love. Why? Because that person has threatened the beautiful lie that makes the arrangement tolerable. They've pulled back the curtain. They've named the mechanism. And both parties know that once the mechanism is named, once everyone acknowledges what's really happening, the entire performance becomes impossible to maintain. Most relationships exist in this strange territory, where both people sort of know the truth but have agreed never to speak it. They know they're together partly for practical reasons. They know passion faded years ago. They know they're performing contentment more than experiencing it. They know if they were honest about what they want and what they're getting, The gap would be too large to ignore. So they maintain the lie together. They perform love for each other and for the audience watching. They celebrate anniversaries of a relationship that long ago became more obligation than choice. They speak in romantic cliches that obscure the quiet desperation underneath. And they attack anyone who suggests looking at relationships more honestly, because that honesty threatens the compromise they've made with reality. Machiavelli would recognize this as a collective delusion that serves everyone involved. The couple gets to avoid confronting uncomfortable truths about their relationship. Their families get to celebrate their partnership. Society gets another stable unit performing the functions it needs performed. The economy gets continued consumption and production. Everyone wins except the individuals who might have had more fulfilling lives if they'd been honest about what they actually wanted, instead of performing what they thought they should want. Men ought either to be well treated or crushed, Machiavelli advised, because they can avenge themselves of lighter injuries, but not of more severe ones. This applies perfectly to relationships. Either treat your partner well enough that they genuinely benefit from the arrangement and won't seek alternatives, or the resentments will build until the relationship collapses. But don't exist in the middle ground where you're not meeting their needs but they're too invested to leave. That's where the real damage happens. That's where people spend decades in relationships that serve neither party, but that neither has the courage to end. The fourth brutal truth is that staying in unsatisfying relationships is often more strategic than leaving them. Divorce is expensive. Starting over is hard. Admitting you made a mistake requires confronting failure. Explaining to everyone why you left requires justifying yourself. Being alone requires developing comfort with yourself. Finding someone new requires entering a competitive marketplace where you might not fare well. So people stay, not because they're happy, not because they're in love, but because staying serves their interests better than leaving would, even when staying means slow spiritual death. Machiavelli would see this as perfectly rational behavior. When the costs of change exceed the costs of stagnation, people choose stagnation and invent narratives to make that choice feel noble rather than strategic. They tell themselves they're staying for the kids when really they're staying because they're scared. They say they're committed when really they're trapped. They claim they still love each other, when really they're just familiar with each other and afraid of unfamiliar. The performance continues because the alternative to performing is confronting truths that feel unbearable. That you wasted years or decades on the wrong person. That you chose security over fulfillment. That you sacrificed who you could have become for who someone else needed you to be. That your one life, the only one you get, has been spent maintaining a relationship that doesn't actually make you happy. Most people can't face these truths, so they double down on the lie. They renew their vows. They post anniversary tributes. They tell their children that love conquers all. And they die never having experienced what might have been possible if they'd had the courage to be honest. The question Machiavelli would want you to ask is not whether love is real. The question is whether the version of love you've been sold serves your interests or someone else as. Does believing in soulmates make your life better? Or does it make you settle for less than you deserve while waiting for perfect? Does believing in unconditional love make you happier? Or does it make you tolerate treatment you shouldn't accept? Does believing in forever make your relationship stronger? Or does it trap you in something that stopped working years ago? Does believing in romance enhance your life? Or does it distract you from building actual power and independence? These are strategic questions. They require strategic answers. And strategic answers require dropping the romantic language and looking clearly at what's actually happening in your life. Machiavelli's philosophy isn't about being cruel or heartless. It's about seeing reality clearly enough to make good decisions. It's about understanding how power works so you can protect yourself and advance your interests. It's about recognizing manipulation so you don't fall victim to it. And when you apply this lens to romantic love, what becomes visible is that you've been manipulated your entire life into believing that serving someone else's interests is the highest expression of your own humanity, that making yourself small is how you prove your love, that sacrifice is virtue, that surrender is commitment, that dependence is partnership. None of this serves you. All of it serves the systems that benefit from your compliance. Drop a comment right now and write exactly this. I see the strategy behind the story. I choose clarity over comfort. I will not be controlled by beautiful lies. Write it, because declaring this publicly is the first step toward freedom. It's the moment you stop letting romantic narratives dictate your choices. It's when you start making strategic decisions about relationships instead of emotional ones. It's where you begin protecting your interests instead of pretending you don't have interests. Most people watching this will feel uncomfortable. They'll want to argue. They'll want to defend love. They'll want to prove that their relationship is different, that their feelings are real, that they're not like everyone else. This resistance is exactly what Machiavelli would predict. People whose power depends on your belief in something will always attack attempts to expose that thing as constructed. Your partner needs you to believe in love because your belief keeps you compliant. Society needs you to believe in love because your belief keeps you productive. You've needed to believe in love because the alternatives seem too dark to face. But what if the alternative isn't dark? What if seeing relationships clearly, understanding the strategic nature of human connection, recognizing that love is a negotiation rather than a mystical force? What if all of this actually gives you more power, more choice, more ability to create relationships that genuinely serve you, instead of relationships you're serving? Now hit that subscribe button, because every video on this channel is designed to expose one more beautiful lie and replace it with one more useful truth. Subscribe because you're ready to see how power actually works in every domain of life, including the domain you thought was most sacred. Subscribe because you understand that being realistic about human nature is more valuable than being romantic about it. Subscribe because you're one of the rare people who can handle truth even when truth is uncomfortable, who can face reality even when reality contradicts everything you were taught, who can think strategically even about things society tells you should only be felt emotionally. And finally, prepare yourself for what comes next. The next video will reveal something even more fundamental than the truth about romantic love. I'm going to expose the one belief that everyone holds, that seems completely obvious and unquestionable, but that actually guarantees you'll never achieve the freedom you think you want. This revelation will either transform how you see yourself completely, or it will send you running back to comfortable delusions. Either way, once you see it, your life will never be the same. The truth is, waiting for those strategic enough to seek it. The question is whether you're ready to use it.